Okay. And can I remind members that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and it will be there forever. Elaine, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have apologies from councillors Armstrong, Jackson, Loughlin, Taylor, McLennan, Greener, Blackett, O'Brien, Oliver, Alderman Tate, and also due to other commitments, Councillor Blackburn has advised that he will need to leave the meeting at approximately 11:45. Councillor Dr. Geoffrey Walker will need to leave for approximately 1 hour at about 12 o'clock. And Councillor Fletcher has said she'll not be able to join the meeting until about 12 o'clock. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, could I put Councillor George Smith's apologies in, please? He was at the Port Board meeting with me this morning, but cannot get to this meeting for 11 o'clock.
Okay, thank you, Leader. I was just going to ask, does anybody else have any other apologies?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Until about 12 o'clock.
Carry on, Councillor McKnight.
Sorry, Councillor McKnight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a lot of work commitments today, so I'm afraid I will have to duck out around about the 11, half 11 mark. Sorry, 12, half 12 mark. I beg your pardon.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McKnight. Any others?
Councillor McKnight here. Mr. Mayor, Paula Hunt, she just emailed us to say she's still at the hospital.
Thank you, Councillor McKnight.
Sorry.
Councillor Lawson.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Armstrong indicated that he might not be able to make the meeting today, and if he couldn't, could someone submit his apologies?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crosby, I see your hands up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to leave around 12 o'clock for a hospital appointment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Hodgson.
Yes, Mayor, please can I convey the apologies of Julia Potts and Martin Haswell, who can't make it due to other commitments.
Okay, thank you. Is there any others?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Mr. Mayor. I would like to
can we
have
just
my
work
hand
through?
raised.
Right.
I would like to give apologies for Councillor Keith Jenkins.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. I've raised my hand. Can you see it?
Yeah, Councillor Williams, I've just seen it.
All right, thank you. We seem to have a number of members who aren't able to get on. Could we ask for the link to be resent? I've had Councillor Walker on the phone, and I think Councillor House stuck as well. Could someone resend it to everyone, and then hopefully we can all get in?
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Right.
Hi, Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Wood.
Uh-huh.
Hiya, I haven't got the facility to raise my hand, so apologies for that.
Okay.
But just to let you know that I am at work, so at any time I might have to leave the meeting.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I please submit apologies for Councillor Bob Francis as well?
Who's speaking?
It's Councillor Joshua McKeith.
Right, thank you, Councillor McKeith. Can you just give us a moment until we get sorted with the apologies? Elaine, have you managed to get all those apologies?
I've noted all of those down. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think anybody else is still indicating. I think Councillor McKeith, you've still got your hand raised. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. So
sorry, good morning, Mr. Mayor. It's Mr. Jenkins, Keith Jenkins, Councillor Jenkins. I've made it to the meeting. Right. I will have to leave about 6 o'clock if we're still here.
Well, I hope we don't get to that, Councillor Jenkins.
I thank you.
Okay, we're on to number 2 of the motions on notice. And this is the one about continuation of virtual meetings. Can I call upon Councillor Hodgson to read and move the motion, please?
You can. Good morning, Mayor Sunderland. Yes, I'd like to move the following motion on the continuation of virtual meetings. Do I read it out at this point? I've forgotten.
If you read it out and move the motion, Councillor Hodgson.
Yes. So the motion is as follows. This council notes that as part of the government's lockdown measures, councils are permitted to hold meetings and committees virtually, which Sunderland City Council has been doing successfully, not last night notwithstanding. The hard work and support put in by the governance services and IT teams to help in the setup and running of virtual meetings and committees, that virtual meetings make Sunderland Council a more inclusive and flexible council, that virtual meetings play a role in increasing the attendance record of all members, that live streaming virtual meetings can increase public awareness and participation in local government, that live streaming virtual meetings increases the openness and transparency of the council, that the place of the meeting is set by the monitoring officer for council and committee meetings and by the leader for executive meetings. And accordingly, this council resolves to request that the monitoring officer and leader of the council continue the hosting of virtual live streamed meetings and committees where appropriate, alongside the option to physically attend where legislation and guidance allows, and to lobby the government to continue to allow virtual meetings and remote attendance in local government. Thank you, Mayor Sunderland. I move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hodson. Councillor Andrew, would you like to second the motion?
Mr. Mayor, yes, I would like to second the motion.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hodson, would you like to speak to the motion now, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sunderland. I think the motion is set out quite fully, and I don't intend to speak too long. What I would like to say is that I think we all would like physical meetings to resume as soon as possible, and I think certainly full council and larger planning meetings do benefit from us all being there in person. But what I would say about even those meetings is it would be valuable to be able to have hybrid meetings, and that to allow officers and councillors to attend remotely alongside a physical meeting. I think that's something that a lot of businesses and other institutions are exploring at the moment. And I think it's something that could be valuable for the council. Certainly, speaking on behalf of my own group, we've found that over the lockdown, our attendance has been much easier. We've been able to have lots of meetings with officers that would have been impossible before virtual meetings. You know, meetings after 5 p.m, small meetings with individual officers to discuss ward issues. It's allowed people to be really flexible around work and other sort of childcare commitments and care commitments. And I think that's part of what we ought to strive for as a council, to make it easier for councillors, officers and the public to attend and see meetings. It's a real advantage that comes out of the learning that we've been doing over the last few months with these virtual meetings. They have advantages and disadvantages. And what I'd like to do with this motion is try and lock in some of those advantages and some of that learning so that we can do meetings better and more flexibly for as many people as possible when we hopefully see this pandemic resolved. Thank you, Mayor Sunderland.
Thank you, Councillor Hodson. Councillor Andrew Wood, would you like to speak to the motion?
Mr. Mayor, can I reserve the right to speak?
You should have done that before, actually, but
that's my bad, Mr. Mayor. I pressed mute while I was saying that.
Okay, that's okay. We'll just continue with this then. Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion?
Mr. Mayor, we have Councillor Buick, Councillor Doyle, Councillor Williams, Councillor Samuels, Councillor Dr. Geoffrey Walker, Councillor Mann, Councillor Butler, Councillor Lawson, and the leader. Could all those members whose names I've read please put their hands down, and then I can just see if there's anybody that I've missed, please. I think that's everybody, Mr. Mayor. If there's anybody that I've missed, could you please raise your hand up or put your camera on, please? I think that's everyone then, thank you. So Mr. Mayor, the speakers are Councillor Buick, Doyle, Williams, Samuel, Walker, Mann, Butler, Lawson and G. Miller.
Thank you, Leon. I think that's the list I've got as well. So if we start off, Councillor Buick. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I would like to
stop you for a sec. Councillor Howe, can you just switch your your video off, please, for the moment. And Councillor Walker, can you please switch your video off? Right, carry on, Councillor Buick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I would like to thank all involved in organising these virtual meetings and committees. I'm sure it's a lot of hard work and very time consuming for them to do it. So I'll pass my thanks on to them. With regards to these remote meetings, I understand that in the current COVID restrictions, physical meetings are not appropriate, but there are many meeting rooms within the Civic Centre where some meetings could be held, socially distanced and control measures put in place. These virtual meetings are helping us the council conduct business remotely, but in my eyes, they're not fit for purpose as they are. When these meetings are live streamed, members of the public do not see councillors who are actually in the meetings, but a faceless icon. And for all they know, the councillors may have logged into the meeting and then gone and done something else. Unless a councillor is actively taking part in a meeting, no one ever knows if they're actually there. I accept that that we as a council may continue these virtual meetings for some time, but I also think there's an opportunity to physically hold meetings, and this should be done in the first instance, if possible, before using virtual meetings. Also, I would like to propose that all virtual meetings, the chair of the meetings request that all cameras are turned on, so we and members of the public can actually see who is in the meeting and they actually taking notice of what is happening. But I still believe microphones should be turned off so we cannot hear any interference in the background with regards to whatever people have got on within the room. I would also request that all live stream meetings are left on YouTube for people to view for a period of 6 months. I was asked by a resident how to find a link for a past meeting, and upon contacting council officers, I was told that only the full council meetings are kept on YouTube and all other live stream meetings are removed after 24 hours. With this happening, it does not allow residents sufficient time to view the meetings and engage what us as councillors are discussing online. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Buick. Councillor Doyle, would you like to speak now, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Conservative Group will be supporting this motion. Virtual meetings have, in spite of the teething problems that I'm sure all councillors are by now familiar with, improved attendance and public engagement. And after all, it is vitally important to remember that we're all here to serve our constituents, the people of Sunderland, and therefore any steps we can take to become more transparent and accessible as a council are to be welcomed, in my opinion. And one point I would make, and it isn't covered explicitly in the motion, though Councillor Hodson did mention this in his speech, is that virtual meetings have made it markedly easier for working councillors like myself to attend meetings. And though the start times of meetings such as the full council and planning and highways are still a challenge, the ability to meet virtually has made the situation at least marginally more tolerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Councillor Linda Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't intend to speak on this one, but I do feel initially I looked at it and thought, yeah, that's really good. But sadly, after last night's debacle, playing out to a potential wider audience than we would get in the council chamber, I feel appalled and embarrassed, to be fair. I would expect to see us behave respectfully and know when we have full council meetings, there is often some robust challenge. Sometimes that's a little embarrassing, but it can be dealt with effectively by the mayor. And I have found over years that mayors have intervened and done that in the best possible way. Last night was a bit of a free-for-all with some, and I do feel some people did take advantage of it being online to behave in a different manner to they may have done in person. As far as virtual meetings have been concerned, for me, it has been great because we haven't had that travelling gap in between. It's been able to get through more things. But I have missed that conversation that you would have with other people before and afterwards. And I think that's a bit sad, because quite often things are done outside of meetings or at the beginning of end that are really useful. I can see having a hybrid moving forward is potentially the right thing to do. But I think we'll have to deal with anything carefully, because if we do that, we could have people who just say fancy a night in front of the telly and don't want to turn up. I think if we do move towards a hybrid of meetings, there has to be something that's really strong in saying why you can't actually attend. I would suggest our residents do expect us to attend in person, and to attend virtually is that last resort. If we are going to move to that, I think we need some training on what council protocols are when we're in meetings. I do think we should behave in the same way in person as we do online. And I do think we should respect each other, and particularly when the mayor gives orders, to listen and to be respectful to him. So I can only agree this motion if we do have some training alongside that, and the commitment of each of us not to take advantage of virtual meetings when we actually get out of COVID. So thank you for letting me speak, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Samuels.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree wholeheartedly with the motion. I think there is a lot to be done. There's a lot can be done to achieve more participation and encouragement for more people to be councillors, younger people who work, people with children, women. These moves make a great step towards being able to do that. I personally, working and having a small child at school, have found virtual meetings have made it much easier to attend. And I mean, obviously, it's been mentioned before, though, that if this is going to step forward, the behaviour in meetings really needs to improve. Nobody that was looking on yesterday will have had any further council as an institution for individual councillors. And I would urge the group leaders and individual councillors to work together to really make these meetings more inclusive. The motion mentions inclusivity, and last night's meeting did nothing to encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Samuels. Councillor Dr. Jeffrey Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to speak very, very strongly in favour of retaining virtual conferencing, whatever form it is, whether it's part of a dual system or it's a single system. In 1998, I was at the Cabinet Office, seconded from Newcastle City Council, and I formed part of the community networking team, which looked at the ways of using networking for local people's connection with governance systems. And that's 20 odd years ago. The unfortunate thing about it is that basically we've not really grasped the nettle of this technology until we've been forced to do it by COVID-19 and the pandemic. And now we've got the chance to grasp this nettle. I think we need to grasp it firmly and make sure that we've ironed out all the problems with it and any difficulties that I have with it. So the idea that Councillor Williams suggests of training is essential. I mean, if I can just go through a few real big advantages to people who work in local authorities of this technology. First of all, you can conference from anywhere. In-person meetings, especially those that require travel, absorb an awful lot of time. Downtime is a significant factor in work when you're not using this technology. Even if the meeting is just in your office, because of your commute time from home, house, or even days can be lost when travelling to in-person meetings. Going virtual allows you to conference from anywhere, giving everyone time back for work, actually frees up time rather than taking up time. The second point is actually sharing files more easily. The days of the filing cabinet and dusty old documents have long gone, but think of the environment of an in-person meeting and how challenging it can be to share files. Even if your conference room is technology equipped, that doesn't mean that everyone's devices will be compatible, whereas with video conferencing, you can simply share documents on the screen to review. Everyone has the same view without concerns about connectivity. Post-meeting, you can then easily share your documents with action items. You can ensure this is seamless by using a cloud-based file-saving server. And all this kind of system is set up in Microsoft Office through Teams and SharePoint now, and we should be taking much more advantage of it than we are doing at the moment, Mr. Mayor. The third point is on the reduction of ambiguity, Mr. Mayor. Have you ever walked out of a meeting and suddenly forgot much of what was discussed? Well, that doesn't occur, does it really? Yes, it does. It does mean you weren't paying attention. It's just harder to retain information, especially if it's all verbal, as it is now. With video conferencing, you can record the meeting, then distribute it after to reduce any ambiguity who is responsible for each action. And that's where the point by Councillor Buick is quite important, to retain information about key decision making online. It forms a very, very important part of that. Instead of wasting time trying to decipher your notes, you can go through the recording quickly to understand what to do next. The fourth point is receiving undivided attention. Some may argue that in-person meetings keep everyone attentive because you're in the same room, but is that really the case? How many meetings have you sat through where others were busy on their phone or staring out the window? Lack of attention creates confusion, which actually zaps productivity. Video conferencing, however, may provide that undivided attention you expect. Because people are on camera, they are less likely to get distracted by their phones or fade into daydreams. Attendees are aware of the camera, which often makes them more in tune with what's going on in the meeting. Excellent reason for keeping the cameras on during the meeting is suggested again by Councillor Buick, Mr. Mayor. The final point is, and this is one of the things that I've really realised with meetings so far, internal meetings and meetings with outside organisations, the amount of time we save with shorter meetings. In-person meetings are known to be long-winded and eat up time. That's because of several factors. People run late, get sidetracked or unprepared. Video conference on average are shorter than in-person meetings. That's well recorded. Attendees are more prompt since they simply need to log into the video conferencing software versus having to be somewhere physically at a certain time. Because video conferencing offers features like screen sharing and annotation, it's very much easier to stay on course. So with my colleagues, Linda Williams, Alex Samuels and Councillor Buick, we need to move forward with embracing this technology, run it alongside face-to-face meetings, but iron out the problems that people may have through a programme of training, again, as Councillor Williams suggests. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Jeffrey Walker. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Dr. Jeffrey Walker. I endorse the motion. I stand by the motion and I agree with you wholeheartedly and my colleague, Councillor Buick. Cameras should be on all of the time because what happens in chambers and what happens virtually are two different things. Last night's meeting, Councillor Linda Williams, was a direct happening. This is what happens in council meetings regularly, and it has happened for 4 decades. And it's about time that the people saw what happens in chambers, and what happened last night happens. Training is essential. Arrogance is not essential. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Michael Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I think we've got to recognise the flexibility that these meetings provide members. As somebody who works in the NHS, it's not as simple as just organising a day off, as some other members are employed in the NHS too. I echo the comments from Councillor Doyle and Councillor Samuels regarding younger working councillors may actually struggle to attend the physical meetings, but I do see physical meetings as extremely important. I think it provides more accountability, and when we can discuss things face to face, then people behave a lot differently. And of course, many members have alluded to the behaviour of some people last night, which quite frankly I'm ashamed of, and I hope this doesn't happen again today. I do agree with the motion, and I do agree with Councillor Hodson mentioning the hybrid way of working, so we can actually attend virtually as well as face-to-face. Training, yes, is an issue. However, we've had 8 months to do this, and we've had 8 months to learn, and we've had many opportunities of training from the officers at the council. So I will be supporting this motion, Mr. Mayor, and I encourage everyone else to, but with some stipulations that we do behave accordingly when attending virtually online. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to cautiously support the motion. Although I do feel a physical presence should be seen as a priority for all the reasons that other councillors have set out previously. Certainly since I retired from work nearly 6 years ago now, I have found being a councillor a lot easier than it was when I was having to balance a rather challenging full-time job. If I can just say though that where it can help members with work-life balance, we also need to consider the same for council employees. Many of them at the moment are doing more than their day job would require. Before COVID, they've taken on a lot of extra responsibilities, and I think for our employees this has been a very challenging time as well, and we need to be aware of the demands virtual meetings can make on them as well, and be very careful about working after their working hours. I know many of them actually expect to do that, but I do think we need to be careful that it's not just about the councillors, it's also about employees. I would echo many of the councillors' concerns about inappropriate behaviour as well, and I think it's probably a lot easier for people to behave inappropriately when they're actually not seeing people face to face, and that's something we need to address. If we go ahead, we need the cooperation of all members to ensure a smooth running of the meeting. And if I could just also add, if we could tweak the technology. I mean, I spent 2 training sessions this week learning how to vote on my new laptop, and I still can't vote electronically. There's obviously some issues there on whatever kind of appliance people are using, and I think that needs to be looked at to make meetings run more smoothly. Also, training, people learn differently, and I know that I can't come into the council and meet somebody from ICT face to face, but for me, I learn by seeing things, by being shown things. I can manage that a lot easier, and I think if we move ahead with virtual meetings, hybrid meetings, we actually need some training in place for that, as other members have already pointed out. I think that's all I want to say, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As everybody's heard, the Labour Group will be supporting the notice of motion. You can't argue with the logic that the COVID-19 health scenario has forced a crisis on organisations, including local authorities, on how business is done. And part of our business absolutely requires councillors to be meeting, to debate, discuss, and then make decisions that officers can then enact. So there is absolutely no problem with the notice of motion. It's a logical step forward. Very quickly, I would just like to say that I'm not certain this needed to be a notice of motion, given that virtual meetings, as we all know, are taking longer because of technology and how we have to currently, especially when there are votes involved, do several types of count to get to the position where we know that every councillor has had the ability to vote on a decision. So this could have been a conversation, Councillor Hodgson, between yourself and the Chief Executive, Liz St Louis, the other opposition leaders and myself. We'd probably have got to the same place because the council clearly is looking to how we move forward, and we're still in the health crisis. So virtual meetings are an ongoing part and parcel of our lives. I don't see that changing, and I think going forward, once we get out of it, there's clearly then going to be room to keep virtual meetings because it does make us more as Councillor and Dr. Walker was saying. So we'll be supporting the motion, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Andrew Wood, you reserve the right to speak. Would you like to do that now, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not wax lyrical for too long. I'm conscious that some people need to finish for 6 p.m. It's very pleasing to hear everyone broadly supportive. Obviously, this motion doesn't say that physical meetings will not happen in the future. We'd look to continue. But obviously, given that Sunderland is a digital city, the leading digital city, we should lead as exemplars. Good to hear that there's been some interesting suggestions, especially around greater longevity of the recorded meetings. That's an interesting note. Good to hear that people want continual training. Shouldn't just be about being trained once. There should be forever growing understanding of how people work, and very useful to hear and ask for different types of training. So it's not just one type of guidance, because people learn in different ways. I'm sure we'll all be able to learn from that. And hopefully our use of a mix of both physical and virtual meetings does continue to make council proceedings more open, more accessible, and more accountable. I look forward to everyone working together and hopefully taking our learnings and sharing them with the wider community, how we've done training, how we've done voting, how we use the technology, and how we can share that with businesses, schools, colleges, other organisations within the city and within the region would be very useful. It's good to hear everyone in agreement and working together. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Hodson, you have the right of reply.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sullivan. Just very quickly, the leader said that he didn't see this as a necessary notice of motion. I'm not sure I agree with him there. It's been really interesting hearing lots of members speaking on this in very constructive ways. Clearly, lots of members have an opinion about it and how it should be managed over the coming years. So I'm glad we've actually had this meeting, which has been very constructive and a constructive debate on a very topical subject. I know lots of us are discussing this behind the scenes and with officers, so I think it's important that we sort of set this resolution down, set a marker down that this is how we want to proceed. Not least, as my colleague has mentioned, because Sunderland is Digital City of the Year, and actually maybe this is an opportunity for us to start, setting out what that's going to mean in terms of the way we as councillors and council committees operate. So I think it's an opportunity for us to really be a functioning digital city and lay the groundwork that other local authorities ought to follow. The only thing I wanted to mention in addition, because it's something nobody else has mentioned, is I think Jeffrey Walker touched on this, actually talking about the reducing travel and saving time. It definitely makes us more efficient. I think this also has had an environmental impact. There's a lot less driving to meetings. There's a lot less council officers and councillors driving about to go to meetings that sometimes last 10 minutes. That's definitely having an impact on our sort of our carbon production. So I think there is an economic, an efficiency, and an environmental impact to continuing and finding a way to continue virtual and hybrid meetings. So I'm glad for everyone's comments, and I hope everyone will support the motion. Thank you, Mayor Sunderland.
Thank you, Councillor Hodson. At this point, can I ask Council if they agree the motion, please? Or do we need to put it to a vote?
Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you, everybody. We will now deal with the notice of motion, which is on the subject of Sunderland City Council's relationship with Chinese counterparts and the Chinese Communist Party. I will call upon Councillor McDonough to read and move the motion. Councillor McDonough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the motion on notice reads, this council notes that in May 2009, Sunderland City Council signed a sister cities friendship agreement with Harbin, China, a city led by members of the Chinese Communist Party, which has been responsible for serious human rights abuses in the country, which continue to this day. The council further notes that it is widely reported and well documented that at least 1 million Uyghurs have been forcibly detained in so-called re-education camps in China. Survivors who have escaped have talked about their experiences, which include internment, rape, torture, and forced sterilization. There have been reports of organ harvesting against the Uyghurs by the Chinese government, with evidence presented to the UN Human Rights Council. A number of Uyghurs have submitted evidence to the International Criminal Court, calling for an investigation for crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity. The Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party of China have also been responsible for the intimidation, torture, and abduction of democracy campaigners in Hong Kong, shutting down the free press and smothering free speech in the territory, breaching the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984. This council resolves to express condemnation of the Chinese government's treatment of Uyghur Muslims and of democracy campaigners in Hong Kong, to write to the MPs that represent our local authority, urging them to lobby the government for action in relation to the treatment of Uyghur Muslims and the Hong Kong people at the hands of the Chinese government, and to request that the Chief Executive initiates a review of Sunderland's existing agreements with Harbin in light of the widely reported actions of the Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party to ensure that they comply with the Council's duties under the Human Rights Act 1998 and the Equalities Act of 2010. This review should incorporate consultation with the public and should report back to full council.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonagh. Can you move the motion, please?
Yes, I move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonagh. Councillor Hodson, would you like to second the motion?
Thank you, Mayor Sunderland. I'd like to second the motion and I reserve the right to speak.
Okay, thank you. Councillor MacDonagh, can you speak to the motion now, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for allowing us to bring this important motion to Council today. Sunderland is a tolerant city. We stand against injustice and defend the weakest and most vulnerable people in our society as a rule. I bring this motion here today to raise a serious issue that I feel must be addressed. As we sit here today, a genocide is taking place in China. Innocent people are being imprisoned, tortured, raped, and murdered by the Chinese Communist government. The Chinese Communist government has long shown that they have zero respect for human rights, both of their own people and of those abroad. From the early days of Mao's Great Leap, which saw up to 45 million people perish, to the shooting of protesters in Tiananmen Square in 1989, which saw almost 1,000 unarmed protesters mown down by the Red Army, the Chinese Communist Party has a shameful record which we simply cannot ignore. We see this complete disregard for human life continue to this day, as what can only be described as a genocide takes place in Xinjiang province in China. In the early part of this century, the Chinese Communist government quite openly launched a policy of sinicization. This policy aims to wipe out cultural differences in the country, ensuring that all people conform to the culture of Communist China, including people's politics, religion, philosophy, beliefs, and even diet. Any differences are to be erased by force if necessary. It is ethnic cleansing by any definition. This is what we are currently seeing in Xinjiang province, and the Uyghur people are being rounded up by the Chinese Communist government, not because they have some great crime or some uprising, but because they are different and because they do not adhere to the Chinese government's ideology. Since 2015, it is estimated that over 1 million innocent men, women, and children have been detained in re-education camps. The main goal of these camps is to ensure adherence to the Chinese Communist government's ideology, once again by force if necessary. These camps can only be described as hellholes, not dissimilar to Hitler's concentration camps or Stalin's gulags. The situation has been described by Human Rights Watch as the most egregious human tragedy since the Holocaust. Detainees are routinely beaten, suffer physical and psychological torture, and in many cases, death will occur. There have been reports of women raped, of forced mass sterilization, and even of these Muslim people being forced to drink alcohol, something which is against their religion. These people are held without trial and without being charged with any crime. They are simply imprisoned because of who they are and what they believe. In any decent society, that is wrong. The attacks on decency do not stop at the border of Xinjiang province, however. Throughout China, we see minority groups attacked in similar ways by the Chinese Communist government, including Buddhists in Tibet and Christians throughout the country. One area which is also of great concern is the current situation in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, a British territory for over 150 years, was handed back to China in 1997 after the Sino-British Joint Declaration was agreed between Britain and China in 1984. This agreement, an international treaty ratified by the United Nations, bound China to maintain the freedoms of Hong Kong for at least 50 years. This includes freedom of speech, freedom of press, and rights to democracy. It was also agreed that democracy would be further extended after 1997. In the last few years, however, China has not only broken this agreement, but it has torn it up. In the territory, we now see democracy campaigners regularly targeted for arrest, many being attacked, newspapers closed down, free speech curtailed, and we have even seen citizens dragged off to mainland China for torture and imprisonment. This includes a 64-year-old protester called Grandma Wong, who was recently detained in China without trial. Last year, I spoke at an event with a gentleman called Martin Lee. Mr. Lee is known as the father of Hong Kong democracy. Mr. Lee is 82 years old and in very poor health now. In April, he was arrested, dragged out of his home, and held without charge. His crime? Leading a demonstration calling for more democracy in the territory and to stop an extradition bill which would have allowed Communist China to deport anyone and imprison them without charge in China itself. Hong Kong people are bravely standing up against China. They don't want independence, they don't want to attack China, they simply want to vote and ensure freedom of speech. They want to be able to openly criticize government decisions and hold their politicians to account. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. In China, this is simply not the case, and that is very worrying and very wrong. People are crushed under the jackboot and are silenced by the truncheon. Our friendship agreement with Harbin in China would appear to be a good thing on the surface. As a council, we should always be keen to foster new relationships with partners and bang the drum for Sunderland on the international stage. However, we must remember that the city of Harbin is led by high-ranking members of the Chinese Communist Party, the very same organisation which is killing, torturing, raping and abusing people as we speak. I am uncomfortable with that, and I'm sure that many other people in this city are too. I'm sure that many will be thinking that we must value our links with China on a purely financial basis, thinking of the potential investment opportunities for our city, and that speaking out simply doesn't matter, it doesn't make any difference. To you, I say this. Historically, we have learned that there is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for simply allowing China to flaunt international law. If we put our finances before our morals, then we are giving a green light for this genocide to continue. As a tolerant and just city, we must look at this agreement again. There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak out. Why? Because while the truncheon may be used in lieu of conversation, words will always retain their power. Words offer the means to meaning, and for those who will listen, the enunciation of truth. And the truth is, there is something terribly wrong with this dictatorship. As a city, having a relationship with high-ranking members of the same Communist Party who are imprisoning, murdering and torturing innocent people makes me very comfortable indeed. Very uncomfortable indeed. It should all make us very uncomfortable indeed, and I feel that we must look very closely at this relationship. This motion is not political, and that is why I've been very happy to work with our Liberal colleagues on this, and I hope the members of Labour, UKIP and Greens will join in voting for this motion today so that we can look more closely at this relationship, but more importantly, so that we can all speak with one voice and acknowledge that this genocide and attacks on democracy are completely unacceptable. And as a city, we believe they're unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonagh. Can I ask at this point, does anybody else wish to speak on the motion?
Mr Mayor, I have Councillor D Wilson, Councillor M Dixon, Councillor G Miller, they're the only hands I can see raised, Mr Mayor, so perhaps if I've missed anybody, could they indicate, please? Nobody else, Mr Mayor, and
Councillor McKnight's got his video on. Do you wish to speak on this?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Councillor Denny Wilson, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Very quickly, I totally agree with Councillor McDonough, but as he is a member of the Tory party, he must have spoke to the government, to Tory high-ranking politicians. Can he tell us what they said about this, please? Thank you.
Councillor Michael Dixon.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. I'll be speaking very briefly too. Councillor McDonough has spoken in his usual very, very sincere way. I joined him on a motion, on a debate on anti-Semitism in the last few months, and he speaks with great authority and with great meaning, and I'm sure Councillor Hodgson will be supporting him. I can remember the Great Leap Forward. I can remember the Cultural Revolution. I can remember the Chinese Communist Party supporting the murderous Khmer Rouge when the Pol Pot regime were imitating an extreme form of Maoism. And of course, we come up to date with Tiananmen Square and then Hong Kong. So irrespective of what Councillor Wilson has said, we are here today to talk about Sunderland Council, and that is the issue at hand. And I will most certainly be supporting this motion. Thank you very much indeed, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Neil McKnight.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll keep this very, very, very brief indeed. I have to say that there's nothing in this motion that I object to. I mean, I will support it wholeheartedly. I completely agree with Councillor McDonough's words. I mean, we are aware of the amount of persecution that the Uyghur community has gone through. A lot of it hidden from public view, but what we have heard through human rights organisations is particularly shocking. And of course, you know, our former colony in Hong Kong, I mean, that's been open for all to see, the amount of suppression that's gone on there, because of, I think it was Mrs. Lam, I think she was called, wasn't it, the Chinese delegate for the government. So I will wholeheartedly support this, Mr Mayor. As the United Kingdom, we do uphold international law, obviously, the Internal Market Bill aside, but we do have to make a stand and uphold international law, and I will wholeheartedly support this. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McKnight. Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Concerns in relation to the treatment of the Uyghur population in China have been well documented, including by Amnesty International and the Muslim Council of Britain, and have received widespread media coverage in addition to concerns regarding the arrest of peaceful democracy demonstrators and protesters in Hong Kong. China's policy on the Uyghur population was the subject of a debate in Parliament on the 12th of October of this year, brought through the Petitions Committee by Chris Evans MP, the Labour Cooperative Party member for Islin in Wales. This year.
I don't know whether I've lost volume here. Leader, are you still there?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Steve Buick, it looks as though the leader's internet connection's dropped out because he's not on the attendance list anymore. He might be trying to get back in. Thank you,
Right,
Mr.
can we just give him a few minutes to see whether he can log back in, so if everybody can just keep quiet, and then when he comes back online we can proceed with the meeting.
Sorry about that, Mr. Mayor. I don't understand why I froze, but I'm now back in the meeting if you can hear me.
Thank you, Leader. Please carry on.
I'm not sure where I cut off from, so I'll go back to a full record of the debate, if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
Mr.
that's fine. Please do.
A full record of the debate is included in the official parliamentary record, Hansard Volume 682. The 12th of October 2020 debate in Parliament followed an earlier debate on the 9th of September 2020, as well as an initial debate on the 29th of January 2020. The October 2020 debate in Parliament included discussions regarding the potential for Magnitsky sanctions, whereby sanctions are put in place against individuals, senior officials, within the country, rather than against a country and its population as a whole. This approach has been taken by the UK on a number of occasions, including linked to the murder of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Requests to impose Magnitsky sanctions against any officials of the Chinese Communist Party who are responsible for human rights violations are understood to have been made to the UK government, but no action yet. The government has indicated that sanctions will be designated within the context of the UK's global human rights sanctions regime, which was set out in Parliament on the 6th of July 2020, and indicated that the situation in China continues to be under review. Discussions in Parliament are also part of the remit of the Foreign Affairs Committee, an all-party parliamentary group on Uyghurs. An open letter signed by 141 MPs to China's ambassador to the UK was published after his appearance on the Andrew Marr show, resulting from his response at being shown a film linked to the Uyghur population. And I saw that particular television programme, and the film was shocking. The UK government has made representation at the UN regarding human rights violations in Xinjiang, including at the UN Human Rights Council in June, September and October of this year. The UK is also part of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, which is formed of 18 countries, where these concerns also continue to be discussed. From the 12th of October 2020 debate in Parliament, it is understood that the Foreign Secretary has raised concerns about Xinjiang directly with his Chinese counterpart, including in July of this year. Concerns have also been raised in Parliament regarding trade with China. Clause 68 is understood to have been added by the House of Lords to the trade bill, which, if adopted by the House of Commons, would make clear that the UK could not trade with any countries that are guilty of genocide. To note, however, there is a legal process required to determine use of the term genocide. An independent tribunal is underway in the UK, chaired by Barrister Sir Geoffrey Nice QC, investigating concerns regarding human rights violations against the Uyghur population in China. The UN's International Law Commission has also been preparing its draft convention on the prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity since 2014. China is a signatory of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The UK government, along with 38 countries, has called on China to allow access for independent UN observers. Sunderland's friendship agreement with Harbin was signed with our sister city on May 2009, as Councillor McDonough mentions at the start of the motion. It is a city-to-city partnership set within the context of national government engagement between the UK and China. Sunderland's friendship agreement with the City of Harbin seeks to generate a range of benefits through the city-to-city partnership. It builds on the established approach with European twin cities, bringing community together and seeking to build international understanding and a sense of global citizenship through these relationships. Set within the context of the city's international strategy, our partnership with Harbin has included a strong focus on education cooperation from the outset, with young people and staff from a number of schools across the city involved in this joint work. The opportunity for young people around the world, including between Sunderland and China, to engage directly with each other and share their experiences is an important part of equipping our young people with the skills and competencies they need to play their roles in today's global economy and society, and allows their Chinese counterparts to see what life is like in a democracy where freedom of speech applies and access to everything is available to all. Activity as set out in the annual report on the international strategy to Cabinet has focused recently primarily on education links between schools and on health links, including a new partnership with Harbin's #1 hospital. The new health links were supported as part of a funding programme managed by the British Embassy in Beijing. Now, Councillor MacDonald, the Labour Group will be fully supporting your notice of motion. Unreserved support of the conclusions of it. But in closing, I would like to ask that Councillor McDonough sends this speech to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary. Since Sunderland is a small northern city, and we will do what we can, but we need the government to step up and do more. How can we do anything if the government continues to pursue trade with China in this standstill neutral position that they're adopting at the moment? If our government, to paraphrase Councillor McDonough, seems quite comfortable with it. I would hope that you would replay your strong words, Councillor McDonough, to your government's ministers on this regarding our position, as currently there is silence. And I will reiterate, we fully support the notice of motion. We agree with all the conclusions of it. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Hodson, I believe you had the your second. Sorry, you reserved the right to speak. Would you like to do that now?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sunderland, and can I also thank all the members who've spoken. I think in a very collegiate way on this quite difficult subject for the city. I do think, you know, we have this friendship arrangement as the leader has outlined, which has benefits for both China and for both Harbin and Sunderland. But we should also always keep our friendships under review, and our relationships with other cities under review. What we're doing today isn't unprecedented. Earlier this year, Wakefield Council, after a similar notice of motion, voted to review their own relationship with the city of Nanning in China, again on the basis of their concerns about the human rights abuses in that city. The danger with a motion like this is always that it becomes a trade-off between ethics and money. And I think we've really got to avoid that, not least because although, you know, our relationship with Harbin is very valuable. For example, The Independent over this summer reported that a number of Chinese firms which were providing PPE to cities in England had been using forced Uyghur labour. That's really concerning. I don't think, and I hope that isn't the case with any of the PPE that's been received in Sunderland, but it makes clear that there's a danger for us as councillors and citizens of Sunderland of being complicit in the subjugation of the Uyghur population if we don't take action. And what I'd finally say, I agree with the leader that I hope Dom, who spoke very well on this issue, Dom McDonough, will express his views to his party and raise this within the Conservative Party as well. I believe there is within the Conservative Party disquiet about our country's relationship with China. But I think we have to remember, rather than the sort of whataboutery of what the government can do, we have to think, what can we do we as a council can follow Wakefield and actually set a marker and try to put some pressure. We are just one small northern city, but if lots of small northern cities and lots of cities around the country start to make resolutions like this and start to put pressure on the government, we might actually have some effect and actually have some impact on our country's foreign relations more widely. And I really think that is possible by setting this marker today. So I hope everyone will support it. And thanks again for your constructive speeches. Thank you, Mayor Sunderland.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor McDonough, you have the right of reply.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, just a big thank you to everyone for backing this. It's been great to hear people talking so constructively. I think it's a complete difference to what we saw in last night's meeting. So it's good to see some constructive discussions today. Just in response to Councillor Wilson, yes, I have spoken to the government about this. Both of these subjects are something that I'm particularly passionate about. I have spoken to the government a lot and lobbied the government a lot about this. I've also spoken at many events, including an event last year that I mentioned at Conservative Party conference to raise awareness of this. Actually, at that event, we had a member of the Chinese Communist Party actually gatecrash the event and attack one of the speakers, actually physically assaulting them. So that just shows you the sort of reaction that we get to this, and I'll continue to lobby the government on this as well. And in response to Councillor Miller, I mean, I agree with many things that you said there. I completely agree, and this is not an attack on the Chinese people. In fact, the Chinese people have probably suffered more than anyone at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. The Chinese people are some of the friendliest people you will ever meet, and I'm sure the majority of them would, absolutely abhor what's going on in both Hong Kong and in Xinjiang province as well. With regard to sanctions, I mean, you did outline there that sanctions haven't been put in place. They actually have now. Very recently, the UK has hit Chinese individuals in the Chinese government with sanctions in collaboration with the United States, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. The UK government also has a 6-monthly review into the situation in Hong Kong. It does put out a report as well, and has expressed serious reservations with what is going on and put serious pressure on the Chinese government over that. But yes, I will continue to lobby the government. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I do think we do need to do more. I do agree. I think we can always do more. But I think for us, if we lead by example on this as a city, I think it's a very positive thing. And thank you to everyone for supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor McDonough. Can I ask Council at this point, do we agree the motion?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you, everybody. We're now going to move on to, we'll now deal with the notice on motion, which is the subject of libel law and training for councillors. I call upon Councillor Mullen to read and move the motion, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I wish to move the following motion, which reads thus. This council recognises the importance of elected members upholding high standards of behaviour whilst in office, particularly in their engagements with members of the public. It believes that it would be unacceptable for a councillor to make libellous comments, for example, falsely accusing somebody of being a paedophile, towards a member of the public, and that doing so would be an egregious abuse of elected office. Council therefore resolves to note that it believes any councillor in breach of libel law when acting in their capacity as a councillor would not only undermine public trust in themselves, but in the council as an institution, and request that the Chief Executive includes a session on libel law in the 2021 members training programme.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mullen. Councillor Doyle, would you like to second the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second the motion and would like to request that I be allowed to speak immediately after Councillor Mullen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mullen, could you speak to the motion, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This motion seeks to introduce a dedicated standalone training session on libel law for councillors in future years. The training we're requesting is intended to achieve two things. One, to equip councillors with the knowledge to identify when comments made about them are libellous and to inform them of what they can do about it. And two, to help councillors understand when something they have said might be libellous and what the implications of that are. Libellous comments, Mr. Mayor, are ones which are false in nature, made without justification and damaging to an individual's reputation. Now, naturally in politics, we get involved in heated debates in which we hear or see things said or written about ourselves that we might not want to see or hear. And I'm sure that despite this, we all believe in and would wish to defend freedom of speech. None of us, for example, has the right to not be offended or to not be subject to criticism, but there can be a fine line between what is merely offensive or critical and what is libellous. We have seen in recent months colleagues in the Labour Party in Sunderland outlining in the media the abuse that they have been subjected to, and while arguably some of this might have been legitimate criticism, a lot of it was also deeply unpleasant and at times libellous, and for that reason I won't repeat what those allegations made against them were. And of course, Mr. Mayor, this could happen to any of us. You never know quite when you might be accused of illegally parking a car that you don't own on a set of double yellow lines in a street you've never driven to. The training we wish to see introduced for councillors would equip all of us with a better understanding of the legal channels open to us in such situations. None of us who commit ourselves to public service should be subjected to false claims by our opponents, and nor would we wish to be. However, to ask for members of the public to respect us, we must also respect them, and it cannot be one rule for us and another for them. We cannot criticise members of the public for things that they may or may not have said about councillors if we aren't also willing to hold ourselves to the same high standard. Now, colleagues across the chamber might be thinking that none of us need libel training because none of us would be stupid enough to libel a member of the public. We would all, as intelligent people, have a basic understanding of why it might not be a particularly good idea to repeatedly make false claims about somebody in a public forum when everybody looking on knows that we're an elected councillor within the city. And people might be thinking, well, we don't need training to know that it's not a particularly good idea to accuse somebody of being a paedophile and then expect our colleagues in the council to defend us when we do that. Because not only would that be asking them to undermine their own integrity, it would be highly embarrassing and create the impression they believe it's one rule for us and another for the public. Mr. Mayor, I have a lot of sympathy with that point of view. I agree entirely that it would be idiotic for any of us to do that, and I'm sure that none of us would. But on the off chance that it turns out that somebody does do that and harbours notions that it's fine to make wildly false and hugely damaging comments about a member of the public, then this training that we are proposing would be of major money-saving, embarrassment-preventing help to that hypothetical person. None of us, regardless of our political affiliations, would want to be put in a position where we are subjected to outrageously false accusation, which damage our character. None of us would feel it was just if a member of the public could do that and get away with it, and nor should they expect us to be able to do that to them. So this training is intended to put us all in a better position to avoid making libelous comments and to challenge libelous comments made about us when we find them. So, Mr. Mayor, I hope that everyone in the council will demonstrate to the public by voting this motion through unamended that we do not expect to face false allegations as councillors, but that we also won't tolerate such false allegations being made against them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mullen. Councillor Doyle, you asked to speak directly after Councillor Mullen.
I did, yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Mullen has set out the importance of this motion, not only in terms of protecting the public, but also in terms of providing useful guidance to councillors so they can protect themselves and pursue cases in which they may have been libelled. A motion calling for a libel or training session therefore seems to me to be entirely reasonable and sensible, and I do sincerely hope that all members will recognise the importance of such training. And to reference, I think it was Linda Wood's written question from earlier in this meeting, yesterday in fact, it is my belief that libel or training will assist elected members in their attempts to uphold the Nolan principles, and I think it is worth, Mr. Mayor, reminding ourselves of what those principles are. They are selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. And we uphold none of these principles when we make libelous comments, and we do ourselves a great disservice when we ignore a potentially libelous comment made against us. And so, to ensure public confidence in this council and its members, it is surely a good idea to equip councillors with the tools they need to serve their constituents and the city in a principled and ethical way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. At this point, I understand that the leader wishes to move an amendment. Could you please read it out, leader?
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, sorry, Councillor Miller, can you just hang on a sec? Councillor Mann, did you have your hand raised there?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I would like to speak to the motion before the amendment, please. If that's
no, we will come back to this. We will come back to this if the amendment fails.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Sorry, leader, would you like to carry on?
No, that's absolutely fine. I was quite happy for you to clarify with Councillor Mann what we were doing. Thank you very much. The Labour Group will be supporting this notice of motion, but we felt it needed amending because we wanted to broaden out the focus of Councillor Mullen's good intent to include our local standards board and our code of conduct.
Leader, will you read the amendment out first?
Yes,
and then I'll bring you back into speak.
Yeah. It was just a point of clarification. Right. The proposed changes to the amendment are: first paragraph, delete elected members and insert councillors. Second paragraph, delete a councillor to make libelous comments, e.g. falsely accuse somebody of being a paedophile, and add someone acting in their capacity as a councillor to make or endorse libelous, false or unsubstantiated. And then we want to add a new paragraph after elected office. New paragraph after elected office. Add, in addition, it believes that councillors should support the integrity of the local standards committee by upholding its recommendations where individual members have been found guilty of breaching the council code of conduct. First bullet point, after libel law, add or breach of the council code of conduct. Second bullet point, after libel law, add as part of its wider training on code of conduct. Second bullet point, replace the 2021 and add all future. And finally, replace programme and add programmes. So, Mr. Mayor, the proposed amended motion reads as follows. This council recognises the importance of councillors upholding high standards of behaviour whilst in office, particularly in their engagements with members of the public. It believes that it would be unacceptable for someone acting in their capacity as a councillor to make or endorse libelous, false or unsubstantiated comments towards a member of the public, and that doing so would be an egregious abuse of elected office. In addition, it believes that councillors should support the integrity of the local standards board by upholding its recommendations where individual members have been found guilty of breaching the council code of conduct. Council therefore resolves to note that it believes any councillor in breach of libel law or breach of the council code of conduct when acting in their capacity as a councillor would not only undermine public trust in themselves but in the council as an institution, and request that the chief executive includes a section on libel law as part of its wider training on code of conduct in all future members' training programmes, Mr. Mayor.
I don't think he's finished, has he? Right.
No, I've finished, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. The screen
Sorry,
hadn't.
no, my apologies.
Yeah, the screen hadn't changed on this, so I wasn't quite sure whether you were finished. The Deputy Leader, do you second the amendment?
Second the amendment, Mr. Mayor, and reserve the right to speak.
Leader, would you like to speak to the amendment, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Can I just halt you? I think there's a hand up here.
No problem.
Is it Councillor Mullen?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I was just going to indicate that my group would be willing to support this if that saves time on giving speeches.
Okay. Thank you. Leader, would you like to carry on, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor Mullen. I really do appreciate your commentary there. I will therefore keep this very short. We have to be very, very careful as councillors all the time. And I'll use myself as a perfect example of this. I nearly fell foul of social media rules in 2018 with my Facebook page posts. I put out a fulsome and unreserved apology because at no point did I think that I was saying anything that was hurtful. I thought I was posting humorous posts that were open on my personal page. But I learned my lesson at that point. I have not done it since, and I've been very, very careful and considered about anything that I do on social media, because sometimes it's not what you think or not what you say, it's what other people hear. Now, I know that Councillor Mullen, and I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning it, had his own run-in with social media not so very long ago with his party, and I'm glad he's still here with us, right? But it's very, very easy to fall foul of what we're talking about. The reason for us moving to include standards was purely to point out that, and I'm not going to make this political, since I'm not going to make it any names, but when we have the standards board make decisions, and we've had a recent case of it, and that decision is appealed, and then it's found again that the councillor involved was guilty, and the party that I'm referring to does nothing about it, that, I think, undermines council, constitution, and our standards process. And I felt it was important that we incorporate that in. And in the spirit of us being collegiate, I will leave that there, and hopefully people can see that going forward we must do this better. And if councillors do make mistakes, the key thing with them is to ensure they don't make them again, because ultimately, and I felt it was people, the only people who can remove a councillor are the electorate, and if they are unhappy with you, they will remove you at the end of your 4-year term by just not voting for you. So I totally support the move for training. Absolutely agree with it. There is a great need for it, and I want it brought forward as quickly and as practicable as possible. And it's not just about training once, it's about retraining so that all councillors, but especially new councillors, realise the importance of what they are, and realise the importance of their behaviour in both their actions, deeds and words. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor, because I do thank Councillor Mullen for that brief interjection to say that the Conservatives would support the amendment, and I thank him for that. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Does anybody else wish to speak on the amendment? Please, can you let us know?
Councillor Hodson, Councillor Buick, Councillor Pat Smith, Councillor Pam Mann, Councillor Michael Dixon, Councillor, I think, did Councillor Denny Wilson have his hand up? Councillor Denny Wilson.
Councillor McKnight, I'm not sure whether you wanted to speak, Councillor.
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. I'm just having a bit of problem with my IT, and I'm expecting a call from work, so I may have to duck out at any time. I do apologise.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'll note the name of Councillor McKnight, and Councillor Mullen will have a right of reply on the amendment. Could I just check, are there any other members who wish to speak whose name I haven't called? I think that's everyone then, Mr. Mayor. So the speakers are Councillor Hodson, Buick, Pat Smith, Pam Mann, Michael Dixon, Denny Wilson, Neil McKnight, and then Councillor Mullen has the right of reply.
Okay.
And apologies, Mr. Mayor, the Deputy Leader reserved the right to speak, so he also has the right to speak on the amendment.
Okay. I think at this point, Councillor McKnight, can I just ask, do you want to speak now? To make sure you can talk.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. That's very, very kind. I do apologise if I have to duck out very, very quickly. I'd like to thank Councillor Mullen for accepting the amendment to the motion. The concern that I had at the initial motion was that the term libel is very, very narrow. I mean, as we're all aware, people who bring libel actions tend to be, well, more affluent in society. And the worry that I had with the original motion was that, you know, what do people with more modest means do? What kind of recourse they have? So I'm very, very sort of happy that Councillor Mullen's accepted that. He did touch on the fact that there's a huge amount of defamation and character assassination of decent, honest people online. And I include members of the public and honest people as councillors in that. And although we have a public life, we are private individuals as well, and we have the right to have untruths exposed. I'm aware of a great deal of untruths that have been made by members of some signatories of the parties, of some signatories to this motion, particularly out in the coalfields. We've got one particular individual, which I won't go into details about, where there's a lot of concerns about. But I'm pleased that we are moving that definition out to slurs. It is a problem. We do need to have a great deal of training for it as councillors. So I do openly welcome it. One request that I do have is that the courses of action where people have been defamed or libelled or slandered or what has happened, the courses of action open for members of the public are quite limited. So what I would ask of Councillor Mullen and the other parties that are signatories to the original motion is that will they work with us? Will they support us as councillors and members of the public where deliberate untruths and slurs are identified or that have been endorsed by members of their parties? Will they work with us as affected parties, affected members of the public, to have comments deleted, refuted and removed? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McKnight. Councillor Hodson.
Thank you, Mayor Sunderland. This is all very interesting. I can't decide whether we're pussyfooting here or whether there is genuine humility being shown by councillors in their speeches. I think social media has turned politics and local politics on its head, and I would certainly agree with the leader that all political parties have been on quite a steep and not always easy learning curve about how they deal with it. I include my own party in that. What I think is different is I would draw a distinction between a political spat between councillors arguing with each other, between councillors making political arguments, even if they are unseemly or aggressive, and between the sort of Facebook posts that the leader himself mentioned, where he felt he was expressing his own opinion. I think that's different between, there's a difference between that and attacking residents. And I think that that's being sort of whitewashed a little bit in this amendment. I will say my group will support the amendment and the motion, regardless of whether it's amended or not. But I do think that we have a duty as councillors to the residents we're elected to serve, and residents might not like to see councillors of one political party slagging off another, but it's quite different when members of a political party, elected members, are attacking, slandering, libelling, whatever, members of the public, because they don't have necessarily the same soapbox that we do. Their words don't carry always the same weight that councillors may do on the public stage. And I do think that's something that's a bit distinct about there's an elephant in the room. I mean, we all know what the subject of this motion is, even if it is hidden behind innuendo. And I think we ought to bear in mind that that some behaviour really does go beyond the pale. And one thing that's in the Conservative motion does mention, the first bullet point, that not only does it undermine public trust in themselves, but it brings the council as an institution into disrepute. You only have to look at some of the recent press coverage of the subject, which we cannot discuss, and certainly its coverage in the current issue of Private Eye magazine, to see that it is very seriously damaging for all of us as councillors and this council as an institution. I don't think it's fair to name the councillor involved or the subject, not because of to spare the councillor's feelings, but because it would actually be dragging up that story again that we know, I know from reading in the Newcastle Chronicle, affected the resident concerned terribly, who was successful in their libel suit. I do wonder if the Labour group would be quite so generous about this if it was an opposition councillor that was affected, but that's something I'm not going to dwell on. I'm going to try and hold my tongue on that, Mayor Sunderland, and say that my group will support this. And I hope the councillors who are lined up to speak will take a leaf out of the Conservative leader and the Labour leader's books and take a generous and humble approach to passing this motion. Thank you, Mayor Sunderland.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Stephen Buick.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just before I get started, I want clarification on just a point. Seems though we're beating around the bush here. We all know why this motion was brought, and I want to get from governance whether we are allowed to speak about the case and the councillor involved before I start my speech. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Buick, I'm going to make it quite clear that this case is not about individuals. This is about the training of councillors for libel training. And I'm going to make it quite clear, I don't want a councillor's name mentioned in this. Otherwise, you'll be stopped. And so will any of the following speakers that try to mention a name. Okay? But thank you for asking the question, asking for clarification. So would you like to continue?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the clarification. Yes, I mean, like I say, we all know why this amendment's being brought. I will be speaking on the main amendment. But the main motion. But on this amendment, I think this is being brought by the Labour Party to protect a member by distancing himself of comments made on a social media group against a member of the public. On that social media group, everybody knows this person as a councillor, and it should be not differentiated between the comments he made as a person or as a councillor. He made them as himself, and everybody understands he is a councillor on that group. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Buick. You were dancing on the edge there. Councillor Pat Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I support the amendment. My problem with this notice of motion is the way it came before us, the way it's worded down. Never should you have a notice of motion that personalises someone on the council or anywhere else. And I believe by adding the word paedophile, you do that in this case. I've never seen this before in all the years I've been on the council. I'm really disappointed in whoever is seen fit to pass this notice of motion as it is worded. I have asked for an explanation for this. Seems that I've never seen it before. and I would hope we don't see it again. With that, I'm going to leave it there, but I would expect in future that notices of motion coming to us don't come to personalise people, and we do need the training, because what's going on today with all of these internets and Facebooks is wrong, and it's not good for the residents, and it's not good for councillors. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Panman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, speakers. Thank you for your latest report, Councillor Pat Smith. I would like to bring your attention back to the Nolan principles that were highlighted in the forward motion. The 7 principles of public life outline the ethical standards that those working in the public sector are expected to adhere to. They were first set out by Lord Nolan in 1995 in the first report of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And they are included in a range of codes of conduct, namely the Code of Conduct of the Sunderland City Council. The 7 points, Mr. Mayor, councillors, leader, I will draw your attention to. The first one is selflessness. It means that you are always acting in the public interest. Integrity, objectivity, accountability, Mr. Mayor. Accountability means that you are responsible to the public for your decision and your action. Honesty, that holders of public office should be truthful, and I must endorse that fact, truthful. And number 7 of the Nolan principles is about leadership. I'm sure that all city councillors are aware of those principles. Since I was elected to the council in 2019, my first duty to the public was to embark upon a training programme. One of the modules was entitled Members' Code of Conduct. The Sunderland City Council adopted this code in March 2013. It was revised in 2013 and it has been revised once again in September 2020. It sets out the conduct that is expected of elected and co-opted members of the council when they are acting in that capacity. And I would ask Councillor Miller and Leader to listen to this closely. The general conduct in the Sunderland City Council's Code of Conduct at point 4 is you must not as a member of the council in when you are an elected member, you are
Councillor Mann, I think you're frozen at the moment. What I intend to do is I'm going to move on and then I'll come back to you a bit later on. So at this point, Councillor Michael Dixon.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just listened to what Councillor Smith said there, and as one of the people who signed this motion, personally, I think she should reserve her concern about accusations that are made to members of the public rather than any sensitivities about the motion, which was very carefully crafted. I was a member of a group of all-party group of councillors. I can't remember what the name of it was. It might be the reference group or something. A few years ago, Councillor Harry Truman chaired it, and I remember Councillor Amy Wilson, Councillor Julie Jackson, and some others. And the whole idea was to try and improve the standard of training for new members on issues such as planning, licensing, and also to be made aware of the Constitution and everything like that. And that was probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Can't quite remember. And maybe we started the ball rolling for the council to get to the situation they do now with giving members training. This motion of ours, of the Conservative group, and the amendment, basically, you've got to accept it because it's an evolutionary process. It's like the meetings, the virtual meetings. I mean, you learn as you go along, and it's absolutely essential that we take on board the main thrust of our motion and the amended one as well, because we've all got to improve. Councillor Miller mentioned, especially relevant for new members. Well, yes and no. I think during our group, even a few years ago, we thought that existing members would benefit from continuous training, and those councillors who've fallen foul of social media in the last year or two, well, even less, were both experienced councillors. And of course, the social media side of it has moved on in the last 3 or 4 years since we had our group meetings to try and improve the training of councillors. So, yes, I agree with both motions. We're talking about the amendment here. I'm happy enough to support it. I hope it hasn't been an attempt to water it down. I take Councillor Hudson's point. We're looking here at protecting members of the public, which I think is absolutely essential in our training. So to make us better councillors, it's to make us better councillors how we react to the public. And I think that is a main theme here. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Mann, have you managed to get online?
Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Mann, you got cut off, or the internet failed, and you weren't quite finished. Can I just ask you at this moment to continue where you left off? And I think it was somewhere around, I want to read the lead or something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for bearing with me. My internet didn't cut off because I'm on the same broadband at the moment on my council phone, but thank you very much. General conduct, I think I was at, Mr. Mayor. You must not conduct yourself in a manner which could reasonably be regarded as bringing the council or your office as a member of the council into disrepute. I was also advised at the time, and have been reminded since, that when you are an elected member, you are never off duty. The role of a ward councillor is to represent the residents of the ward to which they were elected. This means upholding high standards, having the ability to communicate on all levels and to act fairly, honestly, and without prejudice. The role is of liaison and representation. It is to bring a voice to the council, the right voice, Mr. Mayor, and the voice of a role model. Therefore, to not be making libelous statements against members of the public, the members of the public that elect you into office. Mr. Mayor, it is essential for any member to understand the law of libel, both in public and private life. It is essential that this law is upheld and the consequences of a breach are made known and enforced within the City of Sunderland Council. It is also essential that every member remembers the Nolan Principle 4, that they are responsible to the public for their decisions and their actions. And when in breach of libel law and found guilty, that they do not then hide behind the members' code of conduct and use it as a defence for their libelous statement.
i.e., for example, they were not acting in their official capacity, leader. I am frankly confounded and embarrassed by the leader's answers to members of the public last evening, in that it is the responsibility of members of the public to vote out councillors who are guilty of libel against the very people whom elected them. Is it then a new code of conduct put forward to this city that councillors are not responsible to the public for libelous statements? If they were off duty, Mr. Mayor, and if they were acting on social media, Mr. Mayor. By answering members' questions, the leader has now set a precedent to the councillors of this city. Is this a good example that basically any city councillor is endorsed to breach libel law, to be found guilty, and then to retain their seat in council until, as the leader says, they are voted out? What this city has recently witnessed in mainstream media is disturbing at best and odious at worst. It's not a good example of leadership. It's not a judgment of the honest and hard-working ward councillors whom abide by the code and focus their time on their communities and their social media accounts in a positive way. How long must we sit in chambers alongside arrogant and degenerate councillors whom have sat
Councillor Mann, you need
along
to be very careful
actual
there.
paedophile. Oh
Councillor
yes, I'm
Mann,
being very careful. I'm
you
being
need to be
very
very
careful,
careful.
Mr. Mayor. I'm
you know,
being very careful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think the word paedophile should be mentioned, because if it was a member of my group, if it was a councillor saying that to my family or any member of the public, I think that the whole city would be in an uproar. It is now. And finally, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your advisement. I back this motion. My group not only support the motion, but we call for the immediate suspension and resignation of any member.
Councillor Mann, you've gone far enough.
Of any member.
Councillor
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the motion and the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Denny Wilson.
Follow that. Getting lectured on principles by you, Kip. I didn't think we can be having that. A lot of mentions been. It's been mentioned a lot about the Nolan principles of public life. Look, I'm not on social media, right? But I do follow Donald Trump on his Twitter, and we see all this fake news and abusing people and everything. It's terrible. It's disgraceful, and social media has turned politics on its head. But we get false information all the time. We had Boris Johnson with his bus with 350 million quid a week to the NHS. So if we're going to stick to the standards of public life, like Councillor Doyle's read them out and Palmer's read them out, honesty is one of them. So can the opposition parties start being honest with their leaflets and electoral paraphernalia they put out? Just stick to honesty and we'll all be all right. Thanks. And I support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Deputy Leader, you reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you see me? Yes. Okay. Obviously, wishing to support the amended motion, Mr. Mayor. The amended motion ensures some consistency with regards to the wording of the motion, but also it widens the rather narrow focus of the original motion to ensure that it looks at the wider issues of code of conduct. And I think there's also removes the examples that were put in the original motion. Otherwise, there was the prospect of this descending into a case of the pot calling the kettle black. Mr. Mayor, I think most parties in the council have had members of their parties being referred to the standards committee previously. So there's no innocent parties here with regards to what's happened in the past, Mr. Mayor. But what I would suggest is that the wider training is important, and I'll pick up a point that Councillor Andrew Wood mentioned in the earlier motion about virtual meetings, and the importance of continual training and training of long-standing members. At the end of the day, legislation changes, and we need to keep up to speed with regards to what is appropriate and what is not with regards to the wider issues of the code of conduct. So I think the majority of individuals who've spoken, I think, recognise that the importance of that wider view of the council's code of conduct and ensuring that the decisions of that body are respected. I think there's probably one or two quite hesitant or perhaps silent on that, but I think the vast majority of us would agree that we should abide by their recommendations. But I would just finally like to pick up one point that Councillor Mann mentioned, and she criticised the leader, because the leader referenced that these issues should be in relation to acting in the role of a councillor. And I would refer actually to not just the amended motion, but to the original motion. And I'll read it out. It reference is that the council therefore resolves to note that it believes any councillor in breach of libel law when acting in their capacity as a councillor. So actually the leader was actually quoting the motion that Councillor Mann actually signed. So I think perhaps before she's critical in the future, she might take note of what she signed before she says anything, Mr. Mayor. But with that, I'll finish off by saying that I would urge every member of the council to support the amended motion. Thank you, Chair. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Thank you, Deputy Leader. Councillor Mullen, you have the right of reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to colleagues for productive and useful comments on that. I'm just going to run through a few of them, if I might, Mr. Mayor. First of all, just to say that my party always stands by what the Standards Committee finds. Councillor Peter Wood is a very professional member of that committee and plays his full part in it. He treats everything in confidence, even when some of us, i.e. me, might be after a bit of gossip, he doesn't give it. In relation to what Councillor McKnight was saying, he asked us if we would be willing to back him on issues where fines, members of our party, very professional leaders, where members of our parties have said or endorsed things which aren't true. And I recall a few months ago he gave the quite terrible case of things that people were saying and putting online about his wife, which were totally inappropriate. And so my answer is yes. If any member of my party was involved in saying anything like that about other politicians or members of their family, they would be out. Their membership would be revoked entirely. So I'm more than happy to deal with it where members of the Conservatives are involved in doing that. And similarly, I think one thing that people haven't touched on necessarily, but which Councillor McKnight did, was that this training isn't simply about protecting the public, but about when we as councillors are attacked and libelled as well. And I know, for example, my ward colleague Rebecca Atkinson has been on the receiving end of death threats, and that's the alternative side of this that needs to be stamped out. So it's a two-way street, and my answer in short to Councillor McKnight is yes, we will work with them on that kind of thing. Councillor Alton was right to say that we are pussyfooting around a certain issue a little bit, and that there was an elephant in the room. I was made aware that there was a live standards investigation, hence why this wasn't any more specific and why we've all been very careful. And just on that, I've actually known the particular elephant in the room for more than 10 years, and he was always a perfectly charming and pleasant elephant. And so I think he's been led astray a little bit on this, but it's quite right that, as others have pointed out, we aren't commenting on it directly. Councillor Mann was talking about the kind of new terrain we find ourselves in with social media when we are and aren't councillors is in some respects a bit hazy because of being online, and it's obviously a new environment in which for us to operate. And Councillor Dixon rightly pointed out that it will be an evolutionary process, and the guidance we have as councillors will change as we become more used to that. In response to Councillor Wilson, I'd be more than happy to support any standards complaints he wishes to make against Donald Trump. I think they'd be well deserved and would certainly merit investigation by Councillor Wood and others on that committee. And just finally to Councillor Stewart, he said there that all parties have had people recently before the Standards Committee. I'm not sure the Conservatives have, but I could be wrong about that. Certainly not in my time we haven't. So I'm grateful to everyone for their productive and helpful comments, and I'm happy to say that my group will be supporting the amendment and then, of course, the motion. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mullen. Can we take a vote on the amendment, please?
Agreed.
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 Okay, I think that's right. We need to read out this new substantive motion. So could I have that, please? Councillor Stewart, you've got your hand up.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
Oh, okay. Could I have the new substantive motion displayed on the screen so I can read it, please? Okay. The substantive motion reads: this council recognises the importance of councillors upholding high standards of behaviour whilst in office, particularly in their engagement with members of the public. It believes it would be unacceptable for someone acting in their capacity as councillor to make or endorse libelous, false or substantiated towards a member of the public, and that in doing so would be egregious abuse of elected office. Next slide, please. In addition, it believes that councillors should support the integrity of the local standards committee by upholding its recommendations where individual members have been found guilty of breaching the council code of conduct. Council therefore resolves, note that it believes that any councillor in breach of the libel law or breach of the council code of conduct when acting in their capacity as a councillor would not only undermine public trust in themselves, but in council as an institution. 2, request that the Chief Executive includes a session on libel law in all future members' training programmes. I think that was it. Was there another slide or was that it? Okay, thank you.
That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Right, is there any further amendments or comments?
Councillor Farthing has her hand raised, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Anybody else? Councillor Farthing, would you like to speak now? Is it an amendment or a comment?
I might have missed it, Mr. Mayor, but I think in the written commentary, it went away before I could check it. The word comments was missed. Can we just recap on that, please?
Can we have a look at that, please? Can you just give us a moment?
Got a typo on that page, Mayor Sunderland. It's Niall Hodson.
Yeah, right. Could you inform the officer where the typo is, please? Because I can't see it at this moment.
Bullet point in the all future members training programs. Just a minor thing, but I thought I'd point it out.
Right. Can you include or can you change the typo in that, please? Is that okay with you, Councillor Hodson? If we do that?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to bring the officer's attention to it.
Oh, thank you. Well, we'll ensure that's done. So at this point, if nobody else wants to speak or make a comment, can I ask council if they agree the substantive motion?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Okay, thank you. We'll now move on. We'll now deal with the notice of motion, which is on the subject of sensible approach to firework display. Can I call upon Councillor Haspel to read and move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion reads, this council notes that the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals says the law is failing. It does not prevent or sufficiently reduce the risk of fireworks causing distress, injury or anxiety to people, as well as death, injury or distress to animals. That research is needed to properly understand the impact of noise on animals and people. In the meantime, several things can be done to improve the situation for wildlife and people at risk of being affected by firework explosions. Fireworks can also have a significant impact on sufferers of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, especially veterans of military campaigns due to noise emitted and the smell of gunpowder. Noise of fireworks can also impact upon vulnerable children who face barriers to attending organised public firework displays due to noise levels. Review of the licensing of all of the public displays is needed, ensuring displays are better advertised to the public, informing of noise levels and how it may affect people and animals. This council resolves to ensure all public firework displays within Sunderland, Houghton, Hetton and Washington are to be advertised in advance of the event with appropriate advertising for the size of the display, allowing residents to take precautions themselves and for people in their care, as well as pets. Host an inclusive COVID-safe firework display using silent fireworks to encourage attendance from members of our community who would otherwise find loud fireworks as a barrier to attending. Assess the success of the event and, based on the results, consider further events of this type in the future. Actively promote a public awareness campaign about the impact of fireworks on animal welfare and vulnerable people, including the precautions that can be taken to mitigate risks. Encourage local suppliers of fireworks through the responsible retailer scheme to separate quieter fireworks from the loud ones so people can choose which ones they prefer with animal and people safety in mind, and give large label stickers to the products green for quiet, red for loud. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Haswell. Councillor Fagan, would you like to second the motion?
Yes, I'll second the motion, and I'd like to speak straight after Councillor Haswell, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haswell, would you like to speak to the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to start out by mentioning that we had originally submitted this motion to the March Council meeting earlier this year. As that meeting obviously changed to dealing with emergency changes to the Constitution for the COVID-19 pandemic, we felt it appropriate was withdrawn. So we are returning to the motion now. As I understand, the Council is looking at the responsible retailer scheme, and officers inform me it's due to report to Council in March of April next year. The scheme already has some very good proposals around the sale of fireworks, but would like to see some of the proposals in this motion included. It's also worth mentioning that I think many members will have been lobbied by residents, especially over Bonfire Week, with emails asking them to make representations. We have taken some guidance from those emails we've in contact received from residents and crafted this motion. So we've chosen to bring it just because we recognise that there is a growing body of evidence which highlights the health impacts of noise-producing fireworks on residents, and we recognise that local authorities don't have the power to tackle the issue of nuisance fireworks, but can take a leadership role within the community by encouraging alternatives. I've no doubt that all of you will have received complaints throughout the autumn so far of fireworks, the impact on residents, the family and pets. And with these concerns, we think there is a balance to be struck. Now, we don't want to see noise-producing fireworks banned. We're not in the market for banning things altogether, but would like to see residents given the choice at the shops to buy silent fireworks or low noise fireworks. Also, to try and encourage people to attend inclusive firework displays, encourage responsible retailers to join the council, so that we can make bonfire night, Diwali celebrations and New Year's Eve celebrations more accessible. Heather will be spending some time later in the debate talking about the impact on pets, and I'd like to focus on the impact on sufferers of PTSD and other health conditions. Many of us enjoy the firework displays this time of year, and it's a tradition with our family and friends to attend them when we're allowed at the house. But sadly, some residents they end up feeling a sense of foreboding. Sufferers of PTSD, especially, and some military veterans who experience symptoms such as hyperacusis or phonophobia, can find the noise of fireworks traumatic, and with the bangs they aggravate the condition, trigger repeated or intrusive memory events, and it's often produces itself in the form of flashbacks and nightmares. Another community who are also excluded from firework displays and events are children and younger people with conditions such as autism or other sensory conditions. I've heard from residents who talked to us about the fact that the dread bonfire week, knowing that night after night there's going to be loud bangs and constantly in the background, and if they are suffering from these conditions, it makes it incredibly challenging. So one solution is to promote quiet fireworks and host low noise firework displays. So we'd like to see the council lead a public information campaign about fireworks and the benefit of quiet fireworks through working with retailers around the city, spread information about the benefits to our community of residents, to choose quiet fireworks when they're using it, that they're having a display in the back garden. And this would be combined with offering this traffic light system, so shoppers can clearly see at the point of sale whether they are buying a noisy firework labelled red or something that's classed as low noise, marked green, and also offering some point of sale information to again promote it at the desk, so it helps encourage people in a better direction. And we'd also like to see the council host a low noise firework display when we're allowed to have public events. And instead of having loud bangs, residents could enjoy quiet fireworks, but in combination perhaps with a laser light show or background music and things like that. These proposals aren't new. They've already been adopted by councils up and down the country, with debates taking place from Solihull to Norfolk, Bradford up to Edinburgh, and motions have been supported cross-party by councils under all-party control or none. And I hope to see the same tonight, that we can all agree and get this passed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Haswell. Councillor Fagan, I think you asked to speak straight after.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, please carry on.
Okay, I'm supporting the motion to improve the awareness and communication around fireworks within the city. Whilst I appreciate that many enjoy firework night, I wouldn't want to take that enjoyment away from residents. However, I would like to see a better approach on how things are done. I'm sure, like every councillor in the room, I've been contacted by stressed residents who are fed up of the fireworks going off non-stop for the 2 weeks surrounding bonfire night. The main concern that they raise is how stressful it is for their pets. As someone who's owned a dog sensitive to fireworks, I can confirm how awful it is for our poor pets and wildlife during this time of year. Every year, thousands of animals suffer stress and anxiety caused by the use of fireworks. The RSPCA report of incidents of animals coming to harm or even death as a result of fireworks. Incidents have included dogs and cats running into traffic and horses impaling themselves on fences because they've tried to flee from the sound of the fireworks. Every year we hear these tragic stories and see the heartbreaking photos and videos of stressed out pets and wildlife. Sadly, this year there was also a report of the death of a young zebra who died at Noah's Ark Farm in Bristol. It's believed the zebra named Hope died after being scared by fireworks. When the fireworks went off, Hope ran into the boundary of her enclosure. Zoo staff said that they believe she was frightened by the bangs, which caused her to bolt, resulting in the impact, killing her. I would really like to see the council run a good awareness campaign in order to educate residents on how fireworks can negatively impact others around them. I would urge the council to appeal to residents to keep fireworks to one night only, so that others are able to put measures in place to protect their pets, knowing that it's just the one night rather than the 2 week spell we often endure. Highlighting the availability and enjoyment of silent fireworks would also be great. I think many residents would be open to make that swap, knowing that it would relieve the stress for others near to them. By the council leading the way and trialling a silent firework display, this may encourage others to do the same. Many other councils across the country are looking to use silent fireworks and laser displays to enhance the experience in a safe way. I'm also aware that Peterlee Town Council, just along the road, have run a silent firework display for some years now, and it's very well attended and residents' enjoyment is not compromised. Rushcliffe, Brentwood and Bath councils are just some councils across the country who are considering the use of silent fireworks to relieve the stress for humans and animals alike. And I hope that we can consider the same actions. I hope that all parties are able to support this motion so that fireworks can be enjoyed by more and stress is reduced for others in our city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. Councillor Williams, I understand that you have an amendment.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do. Thank you.
Yeah, can you read it out? Or can you just hang on a sec? Councillor McDonough, your hand's raised.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was just going to speak on the motion, but that's fine.
Okay. Councillor Williams, would you like to read out the amendment, please?
Right. Is it coming up on the screen?
If you just be patient,
yeah.
We'll see.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'd like to delete the paragraph beginning with host an inclusive safe firework display, as I'm not really sure there is such a thing. So the amended motion would read, this council notes that the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, that's the RSPCA, says the law is failing. It does not prevent or sufficiently reduce the risk of fireworks causing distress, injury or anxiety to people, as well as death, injury or distress to animals. That further research is needed to properly understand the impact of noise on animals and people. In the meantime, several things can be done to improve the situation for wildlife and people at risk of being affected by firework explosions. Fireworks can also have a significant impact on sufferers of post-traumatic stress disorder, that's PTSD, especially veterans of military campaigns due to noise emitted and the smell of gunpowder. Noise of fireworks can also impact upon vulnerable children who face barriers to attending organised public firework displays due to noise levels. Review of the licensing of all public firework displays is needed, ensuring displays are better advertised to the public, informing of noise levels and how it may affect people and animals. This council resolves to ensure all public firework displays within Sunderland, Houghton, Hetton and Washington to be advertised in advance of the event with appropriate advertising for the size of the display, allowing residents to take precautions themselves and for people in their care. Allowing residents to take precautions themselves and for people in their care as well as pets. To actively promote a public awareness campaign about the impact of fireworks on animal welfare and vulnerable people, including the precautions that can be taken to mitigate risks. Encourage local suppliers of fireworks through the responsible retailer scheme to separate quieter fireworks from the loud ones so people can choose which ones they prefer with animal and people safety in mind. Give large labels to sticker the products with green for quiet, red for loud. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I so move the amendment.
Okay, Councillor Dr. Jeffrey Walker, do you second the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I second the amendment and reserve the right to speak, please.
Okay. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak, please?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As members previously have mentioned, I have been contacted by residents about fireworks, and when I think back to when I was a small child, we used to have a bonfire in our street and we would have fireworks. When I think back, that must have been a nightmare. We all did what I would report people for doing now, keep our wood in the outhouses and then dashed it out there at the last minute to get it sent up. We would also put things like potatoes in the fire and try and cook sausages. And when you think about it, we're lucky we didn't die of salmonella or some other disease. Everything would be totally undercooked. I'm amazed there wasn't any damage or even death around those. Sadly, I do have one of my younger son's friends was pushed into a bonfire and received substantial damage to his hands, which are still visible to this day. He was about 14 at the time and really, really awful. So I think from that time, we've now all moved on, and I wouldn't dream of having a bonfire or fireworks in the street or in my garden. I wouldn't dream of going to a bonfire that was just a collective of people's rubbish in there. I do, like many other people, like a display, and we all who and are at the colours, and sometimes the sound as well, because it can be useful. My kids haven't had fireworks in the garden. They've had sparklers, which many other people do, and what we've often done it with is a barbecue. My grandchildren haven't had the sparklers. They've just been to events. So I think we're sure as that moves on. Sadly, animals can't ignore, and we can't prepare them in the same way as you can with children. Even this week, having looked at posts on Facebook, people have a range of things that they can put in place for their animals, like a wrap around their face and their ears, because it is the noise as well as the smell for them. And that does seem to help, but it isn't what we should hopefully be doing in a civilized society. We also, as has already been mentioned, we have fireworks for many other occasions other than, say, Halloween, Diwali, Bonfire Night and New Year's Eve. They all seem to have come on later. We also have them for weddings, christenings, baby showers, exam celebrations, birthdays. And in my area, during the Clap for Carers, there was someone setting off fireworks at the end of the clap that went on for the full time. Can't we just have ordinary fireworks? Do they always have to be spectacular around our homes? Spectacular is wonderful in a big event, and I do love to go and see a proper event. Fireworks, again, in a small area are unpredictable, and in the wrong hands can be fatal. Sadly, we have all heard of certain characters who will run round doing things like shoving bangers through letterboxes or setting them off around a corner to scare people. They have fallen into disrepute from that. Do have two neighbours in my street. One who is always...
Sorry, Sunderland, point of order, please. It's Niall Hodson.
Councillor Hodson.
Yeah, the rules of procedure 13.7a regarding amendments. I am listening with interest to the councillor's story, which is affecting and relevant, but we haven't actually had the amendment explained, specifically the removal of this paragraph. And can I just ask that she does clarify that for members?
Sorry, I potentially was a little bit remiss in doing that. I did make a comment that the paragraph which has been removed was about COVID safe fireworks, which I haven't heard of, and if you have, I would welcome that, which is why, just to be factually correct, and you can't particularly assess the success of an event based on one firework event, which is why we've moved the amendment. Does that explain to the councillor?
Am I allowed to come back in there, Mayor Sunderland?
No.
Can I just bring it in once Councillor Williams is finished? I will be asking for comments after Councillor Williams is finished, so I'll bring you in then, Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks for the guidance, Mr. Mayor. As I was saying, I have two neighbours. One guy who has always had what I would term as an industrial type firework, and you could see them all over. Then another neighbour a few doors away who tends to find the shells and the empty casings in her garden and is typically furious about that. So isn't it time we limited the sale of fireworks, particularly, as I said, what I'd call industrial type, to sell to event coordinators only? Sainsbury's this year made a very brave move not to stock them, and I would applaud them for doing that. It would be nice if other supermarkets would go there. So for me, we need to press government to review fireworks, their production and sale, as well as the noise levels, so that we can enjoy them safely. All of the events we do have to put in a risk assessment safety plan. So I think anything organised is done with the best of intent. You can never absolutely 100% guarantee there will be nothing in there. We have mentioned post-traumatic stress, and I have a niece whose husband was in the army. They're both just under 30 now, and just a little, Vicky writes either poetry or she writes small stories about what's happened in her life, and I'd just like to read this one to people, which is a direct impact on their family. So, you know that peaceful look on someone's face when they're a million miles away, blissfully searching their imagination, hopes and dreams. That sometimes is the look that brings reality crashing down for us, because that look doesn't mean he's a million miles away. He's approximately 3,500 miles away, all the way back to Afghanistan. The glazed eyes transform from daydream to nightmare, and the sudden shock that brings you back into the room is a gunshot or an IED that surges instant panic and adrenaline in his mind. While we all go about with our conversation in daily life, they as a family are back fighting for his comrades, fighting for his country, and fighting for our marriage at times, because somewhere, somehow, we added another part to our lives that wasn't even invited. Bit like a stray dog who you protect and shelter, but every now and again, the scruffy little monkey jumps up and bites you. And even if we don't stop it for animals and young children, can we really consider what situation my niece and her husband go through, and I'm sure many other people with PTSD? I so move the amendment, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who else wishes to speak to the amendment?
Councillor Haswell, Councillor Farthing, Councillor Hodgson, the Leader, Councillor Lawson, so, Mr. Mayor, the names that I have are Councillors Haswell, Farthing, Hodgson, Lawson and the Leader. If there are any other members who wish to speak, could they indicate, please? I think that's it then, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, at this point, Councillor Hodgson.
That's kind of you, Mayor Sunderland. I only am coming back just to, as Linda Williams invited me to reply. I don't want to, I'm treading very carefully because I think it sounds to me, I was very affected by what Linda was saying, which is quite moving. And I think Martin Haswell and Heather Fagan also spoke quite sensitively on this subject. And I think by the sounds of it, we're all broadly on the same page. It's the COVID safe element that that is being objected to by the Labour group. I mean, maybe fair enough, but what I'm worried about is we're not just removing that word, you know, those two words, COVID safe, but we're removing this entire paragraph, which does alter the motion quite significantly. I think the aim of that paragraph is to actually resolve to do something. You know, Martin spoke about the council taking a leadership role and sort of leading by example of how fireworks can be done in a way that's more sensitive and more understanding of animals and PTSD sufferers. And I worry that if we remove that entire paragraph, rather than just amend the wording slightly, we're sort of undermining the premise of the motion, if you follow me. So I wonder if the movers of the motion and the Labour councillors who are lined up to speak might consider a more, I'm sure Martin will say so, but perhaps a smaller adjustment to the wording of that paragraph rather than deleting it entirely. Thank you, Mayor Sunderland.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Farthing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I received a similar sort of motion from the RSPCA and did actually put it forward for consideration by our Labour group. But we decided that we would only put one motion forward because we wanted to limit the length of the meeting. And of course, for us, the minimising of child poverty was paramount. To some extent, the amendment removes the oxymoron proposed in the proposed resolutions. I don't think it's possible currently to have an inclusive COVID-safe event. And it would be dark normally when we would have a firework display, and it would be extremely difficult to marshal, because those that didn't want to adhere to social distancing, it would be difficult to keep tabs on them. And I also think across the city, it's quite, if we're talking about one display, it's quite difficult to have it that it is inclusive to all parts of the city. Even if it's at the seafront, I would find it difficult to get to it and find somewhere to park from Washington. And we don't often have transport late at night. So it's that sort of issue that affects us. But I think perhaps what we would want to do as a council is explore the possibility of looking at some form of display that is quiet. However, the research that I've done on quiet fireworks would suggest that they are probably more aligned to the type of firework that you would have in a domestic display rather than in a sort of public display, because most public displays have rockets so that they can be seen. And in order to work, rockets have to explode. That's how they show their colours. And they're sort of fireworks effectively. So I think that is quite difficult. And as I sit here in my office at home, I'm actually facing a photograph of my husband and myself that was taken in Kowloon with a display of Soleil Luminaire and fireworks in Hong Kong. Now that's quite a big space. It's much wider than the River Wear. We don't have a space other than the seafront that's anything like that. But I mean, I suppose it's something that we could explore. And now I want to turn to a bit of a personal story, going back to my childhood. So I do beg council's indulgence. I was the first grandchild in our family, and to say I was somewhat indulged is very much an understatement. As a very young child, I was fearful of loud, sudden noises, so balloons, Christmas crackers and fireworks were on my hands over ears list. My recollection of firework night was that my mother's father, Grandad Guttridge, was in charge. Gutty, as he was called, was in charge of the purchases, and I'm sure in those days different types of fireworks could be selected. And for my benefit, he would choose fireworks that were in effect quiet. So he obviously had sparklers, which still feature on the quiet fireworks lists. We had Catherine wheels that had to be pinned to the shed or a wooden post, and as they whizzed, but sometimes they got stuck, but they were pretty and colourful and not too noisy. We had very small rockets which were stationed in milk bottles ready to be lit, that whooshed and then seemed to disappear with little display. My favourite of all was a Roman candle, absolutely quiet with lovely changing colours. And I think you can also get something called golden snow, which again is a relatively quiet firework, but not suitable for a public display. When individual purchases were replaced with a selection box, there was less control over the nature of fireworks. And I recall with horror something called a crackerjack, which I think must have been a firecracker, as it snapped and crackled its wayward path to my feet. On one occasion, which the climax, which Gutty said was a super Roman candle, as he set light to it while holding it before placing it on the ground, exploded with an extremely loud bang. Needless to say, his hand was badly injured, an event I have not forgotten, though the detail of the injury was kept from my eyes. Now, I shall now move further ahead in my life story to when I was a young mother. The BBC, I think it must have been, on the Tonight programme, which Cliff Mitchellmore hosted, ran a campaign to draw attention to the horrific injuries that fireworks have caused, particularly to children. And I resolved at that time not to purchase, and as a parent, apart from the odd packet of sparklers, I never have bought fireworks. And I've checked with my daughters, and they say, yes, we didn't have anything other than sparklers. And they have continued that practice. They themselves have never bought fireworks for their families either. I think we did possibly attend a firework display or a bonfire night, and it was probably more of a bonfire than a firework display in those days. And nowadays, it seems that the purchase of fireworks on an individual basis have become more popular, because this year we haven't had events. I don't think we allowed any events of firework displays, and yet we seem to have had a season which has lasted from before Halloween and has continued through to the 5th of November and beyond to Diwali. And I'm sure that it will resume again at Christmas and New Year. And it is very difficult for people with pets to cope with the noises. And you can hear the noise, but you can't even sometimes see the display. All you can hear is the noise. And my friends and neighbours, a couple of them have got rescue dogs, which for whatever has happened to them in the past seem to be extremely timid. So for them, it's an absolute nightmare to try and keep those pets safe. So yes, I do support the gist of the motion, and I do think that it's just that paragraph relating to the inclusivity and the safe COVID event. I don't think such events can exist currently. Perhaps next year when we've got a vaccine, but not this year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Farthing. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've listened to the comments around what the council is being asked to do, and I wonder if I could just remind members about the fantastic firework display that the events team organise for Horton Feast in Coalfields every year. Sadly, we couldn't have it this year, but every year the events team will bring to the Horton Feast Steering Committee their plans for a firework display, which is very popular within Horton and surrounding areas. We have had a lot of discussion in the steering group about the firework display, about is it relevant, do people like them, should we maybe stop doing it? Sometimes those discussions have been on cost rather than on practical matters, but the firework display goes ahead every year, well organised, and what they do is there's a lot of music used, so that the noise isn't about the fireworks but more about the music that accompanies the fireworks. And you know, strangely enough, you don't actually have to go to the firework display to watch it. So what Councillor Farthing was saying about finding somewhere that would be big enough other than the seafront. Neighbours from around the surrounding area can see the fireworks and can enjoy them. And on a Friday night, if any of you have been to the opening ceremony, there always used to be a very short firework display to accompany the switching on of the Horton Feast lights. Well, we dispensed with that for, I think, probably about the last 3 years now, and we've had a laser show instead, and that's also been very popular. So, you know, I don't think the council is any stranger to organising things like this. So maybe it's just something that, you know, can be added. People can talk to the events team about what this notice of motion is actually asking for, because I know that the events team is really good at organising firework displays. Councillor Farthing's comments brought back lots of memories of fireworks in my grandma's backyard on a Saturday night, the nearest Saturday to bonfire night. And I think the firework you're talking about, Louise, isn't a thunderjack. It was a jumping jack. And I still get nightmares about one that chased my dad around the yard. And I've never been a great fan of fireworks, and we've never had them for our own children or for our grandchildren. Fortunately, our grand dogs don't seem to mind the noise at all, but I suppose we're very lucky in that respect. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm sure that our events team could implement any changes that we would want to see with our firework displays throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Leader, can you just give us a minute?
Yes.
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Hodson's query about why we removed that paragraph. It was very simple, Councillor Hodson. We're not holding fireworks displays at all at the moment across the city because of the public health situation. And the paragraph that you're referring to explicitly says host. So it was council committing to do something when we're not doing what I would reference as normal fireworks displays. We absolutely should not be doing any sort of fireworks display, whether they're for noise, normal, loud fireworks displays or for silent, COVID friendly. And I will reiterate my colleague's words. I've no idea how you get a crowd of people to be COVID friendly and watch a fireworks display. So we genuinely felt it was just important at this time to take that paragraph out. It's the only change to the notice of motion. We agree with everything else. And once we get through this health scenario that we're in, and nobody knows when that will be, and we start to look at when we're going to be hosting events for residents to congregate at sometime in hopefully 2021, I think we can look at it then, Councillor Hodgson, and I hope you would accept that. It was genuinely because it was felt to be completely impractical, given that we're not hosting any outdoor events at the moment. So I just wanted to make that point of clarity for Councillor Hodgson. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Dr. Jeffrey Walker, I believe you reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to pick up on a few little points there, really, that were made. Like the leader, I'm a little bit puzzled about what can be COVID safe in a firework display with levels of excitement being what they are and children being what they are in terms of jumping around, etc. I think it's very important the point being made about the leadership role of the local authority, but in terms of events, I think Councillor Lawson made the point quite well that we have been very significant in organising very good, high-quality events, and that haven't necessarily had to be spaced in the way a COVID-19 update, COVID-19 safety requirement would, in my mind, have to be held. One of the major concerns, if I can just make a final point, Mr. Mayor, is the extended use this time from around Halloween and bonfire night of the use of industrial standard display fireworks. And there was one incredible display that I witnessed from my living room window from Whitefield Estate a few nights ago. It was a couple of nights before bonfire night, which was clearly an industrial standard display because it went off in series and it was clearly to a pattern as rockets were getting higher and higher. I raised this with the Chief Fire Officer, Mr. Mayor, and he said what is happening with these industrial displays is that they're being bought through online companies and normally advertised through Facebook. So the fire service is aware of that issue, that the rogue fireworks are being spread through existing electronic networks. Exactly what we do about it, I don't know. But being COVID safe is clearly not the answer to that problem. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Haswell, I know you want to speak, but you've got the right to reply, so I'm bringing you in now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a bit saddened about this change. The terminology for COVID safe can be interpreted as it's not going to create any sort of spreading event. Now, I'm not suggesting that we hold a display tomorrow while we're in a national lockdown. There could be common sense approach to it. We could wait until there's a vaccine. We could wait until the situation is passed. Now, I appreciate we don't know how long the situation is going to be, but this could be added to the to-do list, just the same as the Houghton Feast is on the to-do list at some point in the future, and other events around the city. So I still don't quite understand the reasoning for knocking this, to take out this paragraph, because we didn't put a timescale on it. We left it open because, we recognise that the executive, the events team, are going to have to put this on the back burner for a little while until the time comes. But we did want to add this to the broader resolution to say that this is how the council's going to show leadership and say, you know what, this is what one of these events looks like, and try to show to residents this is a great alternative for noise producing fireworks. In terms of where that displays on, as Councillor Farthing mentioned, the council in normal times puts on quite a few firework displays throughout the year and doesn't seem to have an issue, and it's a question of swapping them out. I recognise the commentary around purchasing the right type of fireworks and are they for big displays. Peterlee Town Council have managed for several years to run a silent firework display. So what Peterlee can do, I'm sure Sunderland can do better. We're also, when we're talking about restricting the sale of fireworks more generally, I think that's a bigger issue, and there would have been the opportunity to add a paragraph to call on government to pull in those restrictions. I have listened to some of the harrowing stories that people have talked about people being injured. I've myself spent my 13th birthday in the Burns unit at the Royal Victoria after setting a firework off in my hand, so I've got an understanding of how much damage these cause, but I don't necessarily want to ban them altogether. So that could have been brought and discussed. So just to close, I will ask if when Councillor Williams replies, if she would just give one last chance to say actually withdraw this amendment and just understand that we haven't set a timescale. The world at some point in the future will be COVID safe. I don't know when that'll be, and would you consider just moving it and accepting it as is? And it would have been also nice just to have heard from the Labour group if they were so concerned, and we could have come up with a wording which would have even said we're putting this on the to-do list for the future to hold a display, but we can't right now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Haswell. Councillor Linda Williams, you had your hand up.
Yes, I was just going to respond to Councillor Haswell.
You've got no right to reply.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Can we take a vote on the amendment, please? Councillor Dixon, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, it was just to be able to vote as we did last night without the electronic help. That was all.
Okay.
Thanks.
Could you just give me a moment, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going into the voting form and it's telling me that it's closed.
Right, can governance please, can we have an electronic vote on this? Can you set it up please? And it is the vote to either agree the amendment or to not agree the amendment.
Mr. Mayor, vote number 1 should be active now for members to vote on.
Thank you.
Apologies, I think my mic was muted there. So if members could stop using the electronic voting facility, please. And then those members who haven't been able to use the facility can give their vote to me now. So first of all, Councillor Michael Dixon, please.
Yeah, apologies, Elaine, I jumped the gun. 4, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Gibson.
For the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Elizabeth Gibson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Truman.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey Walker.
And 4.
Thank you. Councillor Mordy.
For.
Thank you. Councillor D. Wilson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor P. Smith.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Turner. Councillor Turner, could I have your vote, please? Councillor Turner, can you hear me?
John. It's just that I voted against and I should have voted for. I put it in the wrong when I did it automatically.
We can note that, Councillor Turner. Councillor Peter Walker.
4.
Thank you. That seems to be all the members who've used the raised hand facility. If there are any members who haven't given their vote yet, could they please indicate?
I need to indicate.
Councillor Peter Ward.
I'm voting for.
Thank you.
Councillor Howe.
Councillor Howe.
Voting for.
Thank you.
Councillor Marshall.
Councillor Marshall.
Voting for.
Thank you.
Councillor Ledbetter.
Councillor Ledbetter.
For. Thank you.
Thank you. Have any other members been unable to vote? If not, that closes the voting, and can the governance officer let us have the totals, please? Noting perhaps the total will need to be amended to allow for Councillor Turner's vote.
Mr. Mayor, we've got 41 votes for, 5 votes against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. That means the amendment was carried. So could we have the new substantive motion so that I can read out, please? And if people can just bear with us until we get this up. So the substantive motion reads, this council notes the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the RSPCA, says the law is failing. It does not prevent or sufficiently reduce the risk of fireworks causing distress, injury or anxiety to people, as well as death and injury or distress to animals. That further research is needed to properly understand the impact of noise on animals and people. In the meantime, several things can be done to improve the situation for wildlife and the people at risk of being affected by firework explosions. Fireworks can also have significant impact upon sufferers of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, especially veterans of military campaigns, due to the noise emitted and the smell of gunpowder. Noise of fireworks can impact upon vulnerable children who face barriers to attending organised public firework displays due to noise levels. Review of licensing of all public firework displays needed, ensuring displays are better advertised to the public, informing of what noise levels and how many people and how it may affect people and animals. This council resolves to ensure all public firework displays within Sunderland, Houghton, Hetton, Washington be advertised in advance of the event with the appropriate advertising for the size of the display, allowing residents to take precautions themselves and for people in their care as well as pets. Actively promote a public awareness campaign about the impact of fireworks on animal welfare and vulnerable people, including precautions that can be taken to mitigate risks. Encourage local supplies of fireworks through the Responsible Retailer Scheme to separate quieter fireworks from loud ones, so people can choose which ones they prefer with animal and people safety in mind. Give large labels to sticker the products with green for quiet, red for loud. Are there any further amendments or comments?
Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Andrew Wood.
Yes, Councillor Wood.
Can I make a very minor amendment to the amendment?
Right, can you okay, can you tell us what it is, and do you have a seconder?
It's Niall Hodson, Mayor of Sunderland. I'm happy to second. Andrew's put the wording in the chat.
Okay. At this point, can I ask Andrew Wood Councillor Wood, what the minor change is, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. At the very end, it currently says give large label to sticker the products with green for quiet and red for loud. Can I delete green for quiet, red for loud, replace with clear identification for quiet and loud?
Councillor Hodgson, do you second the amendment?
Yes, Mayor Sunderland, happy to second.
Okay. Councillor Wood, would you like to speak to the slight amendment, please?
Very quickly and briefly, just to identify by colours that are difficult for some people to see. What we want to do is identify loud and quiet. The minor amendment changes the emphasis so that it is easier to understand which fireworks are quiet and which fireworks are loud. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak to this? Councillor Miller, you've got your hand raised. Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just to say, I'm sure the Labour Group will support that minor amendment.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Mullen?
We will also support it, Mr. Mayor, so no need for a vote for us.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Can we agree the substantive motion with that slight amendment in, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Somebody says me too.
Okay.
Agreed.
Right. Right. Okay. We've agreed the substantive motion, and obviously we've agreed the slight amendment, and we now move on. The next item is reports, which includes a report of the leader on special urgency decisions and a supplementary report on this, a report on the approval of absence from meetings, together with a report on appointment to bodies and outside bodies. Supplementary report has also been circulated. We will take these in turn, starting with the leader's report on special urgency decisions. Leader, would you like to please move the report and supplementary?
I move the report and supplementary report, Mr. Mayor.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report?
Second the report, Mr. Mayor.
Does Council agree to receive the report?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Speak on this, please.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. We have a couple of people who want to speak on this. So at this time, can I bring Councillor Mullen in, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make an offer because I've noticed that twice now the Labour Group has left vacancies, particularly on health scrutiny and licensing and regulatory. Could we have confirmation that that is intentional and not an error in the document we've been given? And if it's not an error, could I propose that two Conservative members fill those vacancies? That's intended in a constructive manner, not as a criticism.
Okay, Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Mayor Sunderland. I'd also like to comment on item 3, the appointments to committees and outside bodies. Actually, very much along the lines of the comment I made at the last.
Point of order, Councillor Hodgson, you're out of order. We're not at appointments to outside bodies yet. We're still talking about special urgency decisions. I'm sure you can come in and ask the question of me when we get to report number 3.
Yeah, Mayor Sunderland, with respect, in terms of the Constitution, I was just saying I would like to make a comment on item 3.
Okay, right. So does Council agree to receive this report?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. Next, we will deal with the report on approval of absence from meetings. Leader, will you move the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the report.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report?
Second the report, Mr. Mayor.
Leader, do you wish to speak to the report?
No, I'm sure Council will be fully supportive of the fact that our independent member, Mr Cook, has been unwell, and given that and the COVID situation, it's entirely sensible to give an extension. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Deputy Leader, do you wish to speak?
No, fine, Mr Mayor.
Does any other member wish to speak on the report? If so, please indicate. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, the final report on the agenda is appointments to committees and outside bodies. Leader, will you please move for the report and supplementary report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I so move the report and the supplementary report.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report?
Second the report and reserve the right to speak, Mr Mayor.
Leader, would you like to speak to the report, please?
Thank you very much. In response to Councillor Mullen's kind offer, I will be filling those vacancies in January. It's just shuffling things around, Councillor Mullen, but thank you for the offer.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak? Please indicate, state whether you have an amendment, a comment or a question.
Councillor Hodson.
Okay, we have. Who do we have? Councillor McDonough has his hand up. Can I just ask Councillor McDonough, do you wish to speak on this?
Yes, I just wish to ask a question, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Hodson, please, will you go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sullivan. As I indicated, I wish to comment on this report, much along the lines of the comment I made at the last extraordinary full council meeting. Part of this is completely normal council business, in that I know Jack Cunningham retired as a councillor during the year, and his positions need to be filled. But once again, we're seeing the former deputy leader, Michael Mordy, being removed from a large number of committees. What makes me very uncomfortable as a councillor and a member of this council is that I feel like I'm being asked to enact a sort of vendetta of the leaders, given that the letter that was widely circulated by the leader decrying the behaviour of the former deputy leader. For that reason, my group refused to endorse the report at the last council meeting that seemed to forcibly remove Michael Mordy from all the committees. And for the same reason, I don't intend to support this one unless some clarification can be given to us by the leader or by Michael Mordy himself that this is simply consensual business, and that Michael Mordy intends to be it is his wish to be removed from these committees.
Councillor McDonough.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, it was just a quick question of the leader. Obviously, Councillor Cunningham was deputy chairman of the Health Committee, who I sat on before, and he was a very good deputy chairman. If we're not getting a replacement on Health Scrutiny Committee until January, obviously the committee will be without a deputy chairman until that time. Are you appointing an interim deputy chairman?
At this point, I saw Councillor Mordy with his hand up. Councillor Mordy, do you wish to say something here? Or?
If I can, Mr Mayor, I'd appreciate really just to clear up any nonsense from the Liberal Democrats. There isn't anything untoward in these changes to the positions. The positions I held that have been changed at this point were all associated to my previous position as deputy leader, which I no longer hold. So it's completely fair, proper and right that these positions are then taken by other people, as I no longer hold the position of the deputy leader of the council. There's nothing untoward, nothing against it. It's just normal run-of-the-mill business. So the Liberal Democrats would really stop trying to make a fuss where there's no fuss exists. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Deputy Leader, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it was just to really reiterate what Councillor Mordy said there with regards to we're simply replacing one deputy leader with another with regards to those rules. So Michael's quite right, and I think little disappointed that the Liberal Democrats are trying to make something where there's not really any issue there. So disappointed with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Leader, do you wish to exercise your right to reply?
Councillor McDonough asked me a question, Mr. Mayor, but he broke up when he was asking it. So could I ask Councillor McDonough to repeat his question, if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, so I can give him an answer?
Okay, Councillor McDonough, would you like to repeat your question?
I apologise for that, Mr. Mayor. Must have had some internet trouble there. Yes, it was just regarding the Deputy Chairmanship of Health Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Cunningham was Deputy Chair of that committee. Just wondering if an interim will be put in place, as the Health Committee do have a meeting, I believe, on the 25th. I'm no longer a member of that committee, but just seeing if there is an interim replacement.
Thank you very much, Councillor McDonough. I didn't catch the last bit of what you said. That was all. The papers should show that Councillor Neil McKnight will be stepping into the vice role on health scrutiny. Given Councillor McKnight's strong career in the NHL, so, I felt it was very important that we had somebody who could fill that role and bring value to it. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much, Councillor McDonough.
Thank you, Leader. Can we agree the report?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Okay, thank you, everyone. Before we conclude the meeting, I'd just like to thank you for your attendance. And can I just remind everybody that it is the Christmas light switch on tonight, so we're doing it virtually, so please tune in. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Good Mr. night, Mayor. Bye, everyone.